We learned from the Rambam in the end of the last video, had Rambam, Rab Moshe ben Maimon, you have to know who that is, and that he wrote the Mishneh Torah. He talked about 4 different mitzvot on Shabbat. 2 are deoraita, or from the Torah. Shnaim min ha-Torah. Ushnaim midivrei sofrim. You have to know that the word midivrei sofrim means midirabanan. Shabbat Torah zachor, v'shamor. 2 mitzvot from the Torah. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho, which is in the Aseret HaDibrot the first time it's mentioned, and that's the mitzvah to remember the Shabbat by saying Kiddush. You fulfill this mitzvah by saying Kiddush, and you have to know, how do you fulfill the mitzvah of Zachor? Through saying Kiddush. And Shamor et Yom HaShabbat is by keeping the Shabbat. As we say, someone who is Shomer Shabbat means he doesn't drive, he doesn't write, he doesn't do milacha. Shamor ze lo la'asot milacha. You're not supposed to do milacha. And that, the Nevi'im and the Chachamim, both in the times of the prophets and the rabbis after, say that there are 2 mitzvot that are called kavod and oneg, and those are miderabanan, or midivrei sofrim. You have to know what that means. Ezehu kavod, the first mitzvah of the Rabbanan is kavod. Zeh shamru chachamim, so you see here already the rabbis say it, so it's miderabanan. Shemitzvah al adam lirchotz panav veraglav behamim, that you're supposed to take a shower, wash your face, wash your feet, wash your body. Behamim, ham is hot water. Hamim, you have to know what that word means. You have to know what the word lihitkaleach means, to take a shower. When do you do this mitzvah? You do it be'erev Shabbat. Here's another word you need to know. Erev Shabbat is Yom Shishi. All day Friday is called Erev Shabbat. That's Kavod HaShabbat. Also, Sheyalbish Kesut Nikia, Sheyalbash Kesut is a beged. You have to know that. A beged is clothing. Kesut is clothing. You need to know that word. Nikia, naki, clean. Velo yemalbush hachol kemalbush haShabbat. Habeged shelovesh b'Shabbat זה צריך להיות יותר יפה, nicer, מהבגד שלובשים במשך השבוע, during the week. Yeah, that's mostly kavod is done to honor the Shabbat. כולם הם דברים שאני מכין, I prepare for the Shabbat. So we have a whole bunch of things. מצוות רבנן כבוד שבת, מהרבנים. בגוף אני צריך להכין את הגוף, how? לרחוץ את הגוף, להתקלח במים חמים, בגדים יפים ונקיים, צריכים להכין בבגדים, להכין את הבית, לסדר את הבית, לסדר את השולחן, to set the table, to clean the house, לנקות את הבית, לנקות is to clean, you have to know that, and הכנת אוכל מיוחד, preparing special food for Shabbat. The second mitzvah is oneg Shabbat, getting pleasure on Shabbat. Zeh she'amru chachamim shetzarich letaken tavshil shaman. You have to have a very good food that you're going to eat on Shabbat. Eating is the way I get pleasure on Shabbat. So notice that kavod Shabbat osim oto be'erev Shabbat, whereas oneg Shabbat osim oto, we do it be'Shabbat. And the other things that we do, we sleep on Shabbat. That is a way to enjoy the Shabbat. Owning is having pleasure or enjoyment. That's oneg Shabbat. Don't forget that that's what that means. And also learning Torah is a way to spiritually enjoy the Shabbat. We'll get to that a little more later. Okay, we have here that when you keep the Shabbat, Shkula Shabbat kechol ha-mitzvot. Keeping the Shabbat is such a big mitzvah, it's like doing all the other mitzvot combined. Kol ha-mishamer et ha-Shabbat kehilchata. If you keep the Shabbat properly, ki'ilu mekayem et kol ha-Torah kula. It's as if you did the entire Torah. And that's how important the Hilkhot Shabbat is. Now a new idea. When we say you have to do preparation for Shabbat, ha-mitzvah, the commandment, the word mitzvah comes from tziva, command. We're commanded that kol adam, every person, man and woman, even if you have misharet, a housekeeper, you should do the kavod Shabbat yourself. At least something of kavod Shabbat. Either clean yourself, obviously you're going to clean your body yourself, but set up the house for Shabbat, cook some food for Shabbat, And the Gemara tells us that the Amoraim, you need to know that word, those are Rabbanim Shel HaGemara, Amoraim, Hayu Torchim, they went to a lot of work. V'osim be'atzmam miktzat tzorchei Shabbat. They did something. And the main thing here is that they did it themselves. Be'atzmam. Why? I don't have to do this. I don't have to cook. I'm going to get my hands dirty. I'm an important rabbi, or I'm an important person, or I don't do this. That's called mitzvah bo. It's a bigger mitzvah to do it bo be'atzmo, yourself, more than a mitzvah to do it al yidei shaliach, through someone else doing it for you. This is a phrase you need to know. Mitzvah bo, it's a bigger mitzvah to do it yourself, be'atzmo, more than yoter mi bishlucho, than sending someone else to do it. We talked about cooking before Shabbat, but you also maybe cut your nails to make sure that they look good for Shabbat, or they're not too long, they don't look bad, or they look clean, etc. Well, the other thing we have is this mitzvah of Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum, which has to do with learning Parshat HaShavua. Parshat HaShavua, you need to know what that is, the Parsha of each week. This coming week's Parshat HaShavua is Lech Lecha, and yes, you have to know that. Ve'echad Targum, read it twice. Shnayim Mikra, read the pasuk twice. Ve'echad Targum, once in the translation. And the translation that all the rabbis say is supposed to do Unkelus, which is the translation to Aramaic, which does not help a lot of people understand the Torah, but that's the tradition, to do it with the Targum. I told the class that if you do it yourself in English and twice in Hebrew, that is also a way to fulfill the mitzvah. So Oneg Shabbat is Hana'ah, Hey Nun Aleph Hey. You need to know that word Hana'ah. You need to know the word Oneg and know that it means pleasure. And I want you to use the word Hana'ah when you explain it. On Shabbat. It's all done on Shabbat. Of course, the mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We have special food. 3 seudot on Shabbat. It's part of Oneg Shabbat. You can sleep. That's called Sheina b'Shabbat Tanug. Sleeping on Shabbat is part of the enjoyment. We don't sleep all of Shabbat, but we sleep more on Shabbat, and that's part of the mitzvah. And we learn Torah. One example of learning Torah for Oneg Shabbat is Shnayim Mikra ve'echad Targum, and you have to know what that means. Here, I went through all of the musagim. You have to know all these musagim. On the test, you can't say, I don't know what mitzvah bo yoter mishlucho means. I don't know what zrizim makdimim mitzvah. Let's do that right now. Zrizim makdimim mitzvah is that whenever we do a mitzvah, we should do it quickly, with agility. We should do it as careful and quick as we can. So, kol adam hu zariz, the truth is that every person is very quick, careful to do things on time when it's important to him. Everyone does that. You go on vacation, you show up to the airport early. Maybe some people don't, but most people do. If you have a baseball game you paid for, or a concert, you show up early. Everyone does that. So the Chachamim said, Zrizim, if you're a Zariz, if you're careful to do things on time, you should do it for mitzvot too. Chachamim sheyehudi tzarich lezarez, to hurry up and do on time mitzvot kedei laharot shu rotzeh lekayim. That shows you really want to do it. We said midivrei sofrim is the Rabbanan, Shnayim Mikra v'echad Targum. We explained already. All of these we really explained already. Madua, these questions are important because these questions are almost the exact questions that are on the test, except the questions on the test will be a little bit easier to understand maybe, but they'll be almost like these questions and stuff that I covered in the video. Madua nechshevet shmirat Shabbat kemitzvah chashuva. Why is it considered an important mitzvah? Ki shmirat Shabbat hi ikar ha'emunah. As we said, it's zeicher l'briyat ha'olam, it's zeicher l'yetziat mitzrayim. Those are basic important ideas in our belief in God, in our emunah. Ha'emunah chi chashuva. And it's yisod ladat. It is the basis for our religion, is that Hashem created the world, Hashem gave us the Torah, and therefore we have to keep the Shabbat to show that we believe in these basic principles. That's why it's so important. And if you keep the Shabbat, it's like keeping all the other mitzvot combined. Excuse me. We said how to fulfill it with the guf, with your body, with your bayit, with your house, and with food, how you fulfill kavod Shabbat or hachana Shabbat. I don't have to review this. We did this already. Malomdim mihitnagut shel ha'amorim, the rabbis of the Gemara, you have to know what that word means. Be'erev Shabbat, they cooked themselves, they cleaned themselves, they did things by themselves. Because mitzvah bo yotzeh mishlucha. Look at musag number 3. I ask here what you do to prepare for Shabbat? That's kind of an open question, but we have some answers here. We talked about it. What's the difference in Kavod Shabbat and Oneg Shabbat? Kavod Shabbat is done before Shabbat. Oneg Shabbat is done on Shabbat. And they're different mitzvot. What is Shnai Mikra V'Chad Targum? We spoke about that already. In the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, we spoke last time about we can't leave before Shabbat too late. That is totally unacceptable. You have to leave at least an hour before Shabbat. So you have to make sure you arrive at least an hour before Shabbat where you're going, because you have things to prepare. It says it here. And you have to plan your trip so that you don't get there exactly on time. You get there early. And I said, Rabbi Kramer, the Rabbak said, Rabbi Binyamin Kramer says, that you have to worry about traffic jams, etc. So double the amount of time it normally takes you to get there. If it takes you an hour and a half to get there, leave 3 hours beforehand, and maybe even leave a half hour early because you never leave on time. We talked about not eating too late. After Mincha Ketana. Mincha Ketana is 2.5 hours before sunset, or 3.5 hours after noon. That's the same thing. After midday, that's the same thing. 3.5 hours after the mid of the day. And we can't have a real Suda with bread, so that on Leil Shabbat, we can enjoy the meal. On Leil Shabbat, there's a mitzvah to eat L'tei Avon, to eat while enjoying the meal, because it's a Seudat mitzvah. We're supposed to eat. It's a big mitzvah to eat on Leil Shabbat, and therefore we should not eat too much food on Erev Shabbat. After let's say the middle of the afternoon, about 3:30 and on or so. We should also make sure to leave work on time, so we get home on time, to stop working a little early on Erev Shabbat. We then talked about something called Melacha Nimshechet. Melacha Nimshechet is a melacha, something you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. But if you start it before Shabbat, that's okay, even if it's going to continue into Shabbat. If you look on page 20, question 4, there are 4 examples of doing a melacha nimshechet, a melacha that starts before Shabbat, but it continues on Shabbat. Since you're not doing anything, that's perfectly okay. Mechonat kvisa, a washing machine, a tanur. We cook food and we leave it in the oven, let's say. You're allowed to leave it in the oven, even though you're not allowed to cook food on Shabbat. You cook food on Erev Shabbat and you can leave it there. Ladlik or, to turn on the light. You do that before Shabbat, you leave the light on. You didn't do anything wrong on Shabbat, because it's a melacha nimshechet. It's perfectly legitimate. And finally, lahashkot tagina, to water the garden or water the grass. All these words in Hebrew, you need to know these words in Hebrew. Please be careful to go over that. We had 2 examples of things you're not allowed to do before Shabbat that continues into Shabbat, like what? Like turning on the television before Shabbat, because that causes a zilut HaShabbat. That's a word you need to know. Zilut means to cheapen the Shabbat. Shabbat is supposed to be a day together with family, to get together with the community, to get close to God, to get close to your friends, not to watch television, not to watch your phone, not to watch. So this is not okay, even though technically it's just a melacha nimshechet, which should be allowed. A couple of things that we did not learn last week that we will learn tomorrow, and it will be on your test. You have to check your pockets before you go out if you do not use the eruv. The eruv is something that allows us to carry in a place like Brooklyn, let's say, but if you don't have the eruv or you don't use the eruv, you cannot carry, so you have to check your pockets. Another thing you're not allowed to do on Erev Shabbat, to start a melacha, even though it continues into Shabbat, is to get on a train, to get on a plane. Even though you aren't doing anything wrong on the plane or on the train, you can't be on the train or plane on Shabbat for 2 reasons. Number one, obviously, it's a zilzul. It's a mockery. Zilzul is a mockery, or zilut, it cheapens the Shabbat. Number 2, because you're violating this rule called isur tchumim. Tchum is an outside of the city limits. You're not allowed to walk at all. You're not allowed to go in any way outside of city limits without going into detail. That's called isur tchumim. To leave the city limits on Shabbat is prohibited, whether you're carrying or not carrying. You can't do that. We covered everything here. Mincha Ketana is 3.5 hours after Chatzot. We have to know what that means, and what Chatzot is midday. You have to eat your Seudah L'Te'avon and enjoy it. You have to check your pockets. Chayav Lemashmesh Gadav. Just make sure you know all these terms. You have to know. Milacha Nimshechet. Ziluta Shabbat is cheapening the Shabbat. The eating Shabbat meal is the Seudah mitzvah. And Tchumim, B'Shabbat and Yom Tov, you're not allowed to walk outside the city 2,000 amot. That's about 0.5 miles outside of the city limits.